Hello and welcome to this day in history for January 9th. January 9th is the ninth day of the year in the Gregorian calendar. In most years there would be 356 days remaining until the end of the year, but this is a leap year, so there are 357 days remaining to the end of this year, 2020. Today's word is decimate. The word decimate originally referred to a form of capital punishment for Roman troops. If there was a rebellion, for example, they would line them up and every 10th man would be killed. Just line them up and kill every 10th one. That is the original meaning of the word decimate. The meaning of the word seems to have been expanded since then to mean a 10% reduction, which would be appropriate, or a 10% tax. In modern times, the meaning seems to have been expanded to mean drastically reduced or wiped out or eliminated, decimate. But its original meaning refers to the practice of killing every 10th one. Still pretty harsh. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you that links to my research are included in the show notes. So if you're wondering where I got this or that bit of information, you'll likely find it right there in the show notes. And while you're looking around, you might as well go ahead and click that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. And I think with that, we'll go on and get started with the year 1493, when Columbus mistakes manatees for mermaids. January 9th, 1493, the explorer Christopher Columbus, sailing near the Dominican Republic, saw three what he thought were mermaids. In reality, they were manatees, and he described them as not half as beautiful as they are painted. Mermaids are a mythical half-female, half-fish creature. They've existed in seafaring cultures at least since the time of the ancient Greeks. They're typically depicted as having a woman's head and torso and a fish tail instead of legs, and holding a mirror and comb. Mermaids live in the ocean and, according to some legends, can take on a human shape and marry mortal men. Mermaids are closely linked to sirens, another folkloric figure, part woman, part bird, who live on islands and sing seductive songs to lure sailors to their deaths. I don't know why they would do that, but that's what the mythology says. Mermaid sightings by sailors when they weren't made up were most likely manatees, or another animal called a dugong or a Steller's sea cow. The Steller's sea cows became extinct by the 1760s due to overhunting. Manatees are slow-moving aquatic animals with human-like eyes, bulbous faces, and paddle-like tails. It's likely that manatees evolved from an ancestor they share with the elephant. The three species of manatee, West Indian, West African, and Amazonian, and one species of dugong belong to the Sirenia order. As adults, they're typically 10 to 12 feet long and weigh 800 to 1,200 pounds. They're plant eaters, have a slow metabolism, and can only survive in warm water. Manatees live an average of 50 to 60 years in the wild and have no natural predators. However, they are an endangered species. In the U.S., the majority of manatees are found around Florida, and many of them are injured or killed in collisions with boats. So if you're boating around Florida, be careful of the manatees. In 1768, the first modern circus was staged. Englishman Philip Astley staged the first modern circus in London. Trick riders, acrobats, clowns, trained animals, other familiar components of the circus have existed throughout recorded history. But it wasn't until the late 18th century that the modern spectacle of the circus was born. On January 9th of 1776, Thomas Paine published his pamphlet called Common Sense, setting forth his arguments in favor of American independence. Although little used today, pamphlets were an important medium for the spread of ideas in the 16th through 19th centuries. 1788, Connecticut became the fifth state to ratify the Constitution. In 1839, the French Academy of Sciences announced the Daguerreotype photography process. In 1858, Anson Jones, the last president of the Republic of Texas, committed suicide. And why would he do this? Well, he'd lost the use of one of his arms from having been thrown by a horse some years earlier. I would imagine that was painful, that he couldn't get relief from it. He was also feeling hopeless and disappointed about his career and apparently about life in general. You see, it is that once Texas became a state, Jones hoped that the legislature would send him to Washington, D.C. as a representative or a senator. Unfortunately, he got no votes. None. Zero. Ouch. So then he ends up holed up at a hotel, brooding over his situation, and after dinner on January 9th, 1858, he returned to his room and fatally shot himself. He was 59 years old. On January 9, 1861, a Union merchant ship, the Star of the West, was fired upon as it tried to deliver supplies to Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. This incident was the first time shots were exchanged between the North and the South, although it did not quite yet trigger the Civil War. In 1861, Mississippi became the second state to secede from the Union before the outbreak of the Civil War. In 1887, Plains ranchers had seen hard winters before, but they'd survived because their cattle had been well fed going into the winter. By the mid-1880s, though, the situation had changed. In hopes of making quick money, greedy speculators had overstocked the northern ranges in Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, and deceived by a string of mild winters, many ranch managers were no longer putting up any winter feed for their stock. Disaster arrived in 1886. Millions of cattle are estimated to have died during the Great Die-Up, as it came to be called, a darkly humorous reference to the celebrated Roundup. Montana ranchers alone lost an estimated 362,000 head of cattle, more than half the territory's herd. Besides sending hundreds of ranches into bankruptcy, the hard winter also brought an abrupt end to the era of the open range. Realizing they would always have to grow crops to feed their animals, ranchers decreased the size of their herds and began to stretch barbed wire fences across the open range to enclose new hay fields. By the 1890s, the typical rancher was also a farmer, and cowboys spent more time fixing fences than riding herd or roping mavericks. Belatedly, settlers realized that they had to adapt to the often harsh demands of life on the western plains if they were to survive and thrive. In 1913, the 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhous Nixon, was born. In 1952, President Truman warned of Cold War dangers in his State of the Union address. President Harry S. Truman warned Americans that they were moving through a perilous time and called for vigorous action to meet the communist threat. In 1976, Sylvester Stallone started filming Rocky. In 1984, one of the Hillside Stranglers was sentenced to life in prison. Angelo Buono, one of the Hillside Stranglers, was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the rape, torture, and murder of 10 young women in Los Angeles. Buono's cousin and partner in crime, Kenneth Bianchi, testified against Buono to escape the death penalty. In 2001, Apple launched iTunes, revolutionizing how people consume music. On January 9, 2007, Apple Incorporated CEO Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, a touch-screen mobile phone with an iPod, camera, and web browsing capabilities, among other features, at the Macworld Convention in San Francisco, a remarkable piece of technology. And I think that's going to do it for us today. As always, again, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thanks for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share. While you're hanging around on the interwebs, check out my other channel, 8 Susquehanna. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. It helps if you actually remember to hit the record button. Open wide. There, there's a little birdie on my front porch. Alrighty, back to work. Okie dokie, Smokey. Okay, that's all one long sentence. Alright, that's a lot of words. I don't know how to say that. Well, figure it out in editing. Some things just can't be done. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. See, this is what happens when we're not scripted. This is why I don't do live shows.